see some of the tables and the printouts, so good thing you can zoom in there. I found it pretty difficult on something like these.
Ready? Prepared here recently, so it's not so bad. It used to be. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call this TAC-CAC meeting to order, and first, please join me with Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Morning.
First on the agenda is public comment. Do we have any public comment this morning? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the Executive Director's report. Good morning, Georgiana.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a reminder to everyone, if you do want to speak, make sure that you get close to a mic because we want to record you and hear everything that is being said. There are a few updates that I want to give you. My director's report begins on page 3. In the past, we've talked about the carbon reduction program, and as you know, there was an acknowledgement in the bipartisan infrastructure bill concerning the carbon reduction program. And out of that law, USDOT went to the administrative rulemaking that took place in 2023. And as part of that, they did post for public comment to get feedback from MPOs and states. And before the greenhouse gas performance measures became a rule and regulation, FDOT and other states expressed concern with USDOT's overstep. That being said, before the rule became final, FDOT did submit a letter to USDOT acknowledging concerns and re-emphasizing the comments that was made, which was not addressed within the comment period, and that they would be opposing the final rule. So then on December the 7th, the rule was posted in the Federal Register, requiring states and MPOs to adopt declining greenhouse gas targets. Immediately following that, the state of Florida and 21 other states pursued a complaint and sought relief through the Kentucky District Court, and at the same time, Texas District Court also saw very similar relief. So the measure went into effect on January 8th of this year, and based on those court proceedings and negotiations, we received notification at the end of January that the Federal Highway Administration would be extending the deadline and would give everyone an extra 90 days to sort things out, to kind of determine the metrics and the things that are happening around the planning process. We at the MPO level, we wanted to proceed cautiously, and so we were working with the other MPOs within the district to kind of come up with a consensus on how we are going to show these greenhouse gas targets. But during February and March, when we didn't have a final court ruling, we met with the Federal Highway and Central Office and the DOT to see if we could find some common ground. So the Florida Department of Transportation has been extremely helpful in working with the MPOs to try and sort this out. But April 1st, and no joke, the federal judge from Kentucky vacated the requirement essentially that Federal Highway did not have the statutory requirement really to set that rule. And therefore, the requirements specific to MPOs in the state of Florida are arbitrary, and they use the term capricious as well. So nonetheless, as part of that relief, there is a 30-day appeal period. And to my, as of today, that 30 days is up. I'm not aware of any sort of appeal being filed by the USDOT or Federal Highway. So again, we're just cautiously preparing, working with our DOT partners. We may want to incorporate definitely in our long-range plans as far as, a focus, the importance of natural resources and what have you. But I just wanted to give you an update on that. And you do have 2 letters in the package on page 4 and 6. A letter to the MPOs from Secretary Perdue, letting us know about this ruling, and also a statement from Secretary Perdue on the federal court striking down the unlawful rule. So we wanted to let you know about that because we have had some conversations. Also, you have a letter of support for several discretionary grants that the TPO has been involved with. On page 7, there's a letter of support for Space Coast Area Transit's submission for an FTA grant for zero admission buses and charging infrastructure for their fleet. On page 8, there's a letter of support for the City of Palm Bay's Safe Streets for All grant for Emerson Drive, and we have been working very closely with the City of Palm Bay in developing that grant. And on page 9, there is a letter of support for the Ellis Road widening. We rebranded that project, Linking Aerospace, National Defense, and Community. And our consultant, Kittleson Associates, has been working very closely with Brevard County. And of course, the Cliff with the airport has been extremely helpful in helping us to gather information. And that grant will be submitted today. And so we are very hopeful that we get full funding for that. That concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Georgiana, and thank you to you and your staff for working so hard on the Ellis Road grant as well. Really appreciate it. Anyone have any questions or comments for Georgiana? Okay. Yes.
Ginger? Yeah.
Thanks.
Where can I get the plans for the Emerson? Where is there a resource where I can take a look at what you're planning?
Sure, absolutely.
So, because I have several friends that run and bike along that corridor, and it's interesting like to see what the plan is to give to them so they can speak up about it.
Well, the grant, I think, is going to be submitted, Frank, is it toward the end of this month? Do you know when the grant submittal will be?
Again, Frank Watanabe, yes, it is, and we'll be happy to share those plans. Okay. The project actually is to install sidewalk on the east side. We currently have sidewalk on the west side, which is pretty much the entire length. We have several schools on that corridor, Lockmar Elementary, and there's a new Pineapple Cove, and then potentially even another school. And then we have other activities that warranted the sidewalk. And the TPO back in 2019 did a Safe Routes to School safety study that identified as the #1 project was a new sidewalk on the east side. So that's what this project is, installing a 6-foot wide sidewalk the entire length on the east side. But we'll be happy to share that. The project also is doing speed management control to help some of the safety improvements identified on that corridor. If you look at the entire corridor, there's been a lot of crashes. So to help improve that corridor from a safety standpoint, we're doing some speed management, as well as doing some enhancements for the pedestrians and walkabilities and the bicycles. And there's several other devices we're installing. We are installing a Hawk for a mid-crossing. Several locations we're installing some those rapid directed flashing beacons, and then a couple of speed radar signs. But we'll be happy to share the plans.
Yes, they're interested in calming the traffic speeds because they're very high on there.
And the city is fully aware of it. That area is considered what they call Lockmar, and the residents are very concerned about that roadway. That roadway is identified in our city's comp plan as I hate to say a major collector. It is. And it's supposed to be identified in the future to be, a 4-lane, which not for me, but it's in the comp plan. But we're trying to do what we can do to control and manage the traffic along that corridor. And so again, we'll be happy to share that. But the project is mainly just to do a speed management, pedestrian walkability, sidewalk, then overall safety improvements on that corridor. Did it answer?
I'd like to see the plan, though.
You got it. Not a problem.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else for Georgiana? All right, next we'll get into the consent agenda. We have 5 items today, and we generally read all the items on the consent agenda at once and get it approved in one motion. But before I do that, are there any items that warrant further discussion or that may need to get pulled?
Yeah, Greg.
Yes, I would like item number 4E, the second project, pulled for a quick comment on my behalf.
Okay, we can do that, Greg. Anyone else? Yes, Bob?
I'd like to pull 4C.
4C. 4C and 4E. Anyone else? Okay, we'll proceed with reading and approving the other three, A, B, and D. A is the Technical and Citizens Advisory Committee meeting minutes from March 11th, 2024. B is Resolution 24-17, final fiscal year 25 through 26, the Unified Planning Work Program. And D, Work Order 24-14, Kilo, the 2023 State of the System Report. Do I have a motion from the TPO? The TAC, I'm sorry. We have a motion from Erica. Do I have a second? Second from Christie. All those in favor from the TAC? Aye. Aye.
And from the CAC, do I have a motion, please? Motion from Arlen, do we have a second? Second from Gill. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, motion carries.
Okay. We'll go back to item 4E. That's 2023 List of Project Priorities Amendment number 1. C? Yeah. Okay, we'll go to C first. C is Work Order 24-13, Kilo, Dixon Boulevard Complete Streets Analysis. Go ahead, Bob.
Thanks, Cliff. A couple comments on this one. I live not far from there, and so I fully support this project on that street. I think it's needed, but I think it's missing the mark because it doesn't address the connection to State Road 501, Clear Lake, and also connection to US 1. Now, perhaps that's because those are US and state roads, I'm not sure. But especially both of those connections on Dixon, I think are needed, especially with the proposed rail station that's going to come up and also with the improvements that have been done on State Road 501. They're both going to be a connection corridor, hopefully in the future, to the rail station that's going to be not far to the north. That said, the cost for what's being proposed for 1 mile seems quite high, $364,000 lump sum for 1 mile of a study. And I think I brought this up before. It just seems high. I know Kittleson is usually the go-to consultant for this, but I just wanted to put that out there. But I would recommend, if possible, if the study could be amended to have those two connections that I mentioned with 501 and US 1.
I am trying to remember why we did not go to US 1.
So,
Excuse me, not to Clear Lake.
good morning, Sarah Crom, Senior Transportation Planner and the Project Manager for the Work Order 24-13K, Dixon Boulevard. So we did not include Clear Lake within the scope of services because that intersection is already having safety improvements put into it at the current project. And so it didn't seem like the appropriate thing to literally immediately come in and do a study while it's still under construction without waiting to see if the safety improvements that are already being installed address the safety needs at that intersection. As far as US 1 goes, as you mentioned, Bob, this is a very, very expensive project already. The cost to do an intersection control evaluation just on that single US 1 intersection would drastically increase it, as well as also that's a state road, and so we wanted to keep the project within the area that the county and city could actually address. Not get too many players, too many hands in the pot, but really focus on what can we do to address the corridor. Does US 1 and Dixon need a study? Absolutely. But it really should be done as a standalone project. Now, we are keeping both those intersections in mind during the process, is even though we say, the limits are from here to here, it's not like we're blinders of not considering the larger transportation system within the corridor. As far as the price, I've defended this before, is intersection control evaluations are very costly. We also are throwing extra public involvement at this project because, one, it's about 25% of the residents that are within the buffer of this corridor are Spanish-speaking. That takes extra time, resources, and money in order to accommodate every single public information item that goes out is translated. Also, I believe, I can't remember the exact number, but I believe it's something about 50% of people do not have access to a computer or a cell phone, and so we really are going to have to do boots on the ground public involvement. So the public involvement got quite costly in this project.
Thank you, Sarah, and again, I think it's a great project for the area. I really think it still needs to look at US 1 because that, it's a very hazardous intersection. There's basically one car length between the rail and the light, and to access that, you're kind of limiting the project. You can't get to the the other corridors, so.
Good morning, Laura Carter. You're starting to cross into another effort that we're working on, which will be the next item I believe that we're going to be discussing is the Rail Crossing Elimination Grant. We are looking at multiple crossings throughout the county to improve safety enhancements on them. That would be handled under there. The Florida Department of Transportation is also including specifically, I believe, the Dixon US 1 intersection with a rail safety enhancement grant that they're going after. So it's not like that is not being looked at. And as Sarah mentioned, we're trying to make sure that we can get things implemented and including another intersection. We do not have the funds to include that in the ICE application that DOT requires us to do now. I hope that makes sense. It is being looked at, though, as another project.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate your comments. We'll move on to the next. Yes?
I'm sorry,
yes.
question?
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Maybe this is just a clarification for the way that typically the industry works, but for this kind of pricing for this proposal, would there have been like a request for a proposal where you would evaluate several consulting firms, or how does that work?
So we go through an RFP process to contract general planning consultants. And so every couple years, we do go out with federal procurement requirements. They go through a full process. We currently have 2 GPCs on our under contract, which would be Kittleson and HDR. Typically we do use Kittleson for corridor studies, but they are actually. Sorry, Laura.
There's a huge aspect that changed why you're seeing such large increases. Annually, as part of the general planning consultant contract that does last for 5 years, we do an annual review of rates, and those have to be reasonable and understanding the inflation that is occurring. So the rates that went into effect March 1st are implemented in this particular work order. You're starting to see now the effects of all the inflation and the cost to do business. That's what you're seeing right here, along with this is a very large project, even though it's a small area. It's a large project with a lot of evaluation and a lot of public involvement. So we do have to do due diligence and make sure that the prices that we're receiving are reasonable. And given the cost that's out there and the steps that we go through to get consultants, we feel comfortable that this is a reasonable price.
And then just one quick question, just to kind of button it up, is I noticed there's different pricing for types of positions, like $245 an hour, $230,
Yeah.
$150.
And I will say Kittleson's the cheapest.
So that's what I was going to say when I looked over at you.
I'm just putting it out there. We're getting a good rate with them.
So then you evaluate like the number of hours of a senior engineer versus this?
And specifically by task, too. How many hours are they taking for the evaluation? And understanding the evaluation takes a more technical person to look at it. So they're going to be costing more rather than someone who's just, putting an admin, a document together. This is a very technical analysis, so it's costing us a little more. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay, good questions, Eric. Good discussion. Anyone else on this topic? Okay, we'll move to, on the consent agenda, item C, which is work order 24-13. Oh, E, we just talked about C. Item E, 2023 List of Project Priorities Amendment Number 1.
Greg?
Yeah, I'm all for rail safety, obviously. But the word that caught my attention was elimination of a rail crossing. So I just want to, I'm sure all of the technical people in this room are well aware that when you give up a railroad crossing, the odds of getting it back are nil. And if you do want a rail crossing, it may be which two can you give up? In talking with Laura, going after this grant, it seems like it is 100% towards the safety improvements, which are critically needed, and not towards elimination. But we certainly want to keep in the back of our minds that let's put our 50-year hat on, and before we go and give up a crossing, make sure that we're not going to grow into a need for it. That's my comment.
And thank you, Greg.
I would make one comment, and Greg, thank you for that so much. You know, in our conversations with the Florida East Coast Railroad, they certainly are, they would love to have a crossing eliminated. That's what they're after. And perhaps there are certain locations where that might be feasible, but then there is the political side of that as well. And so we, after our conversation with an FECR representative, we will be meeting with Brevard County, the City of Cocoa, and the City of Melbourne to kind of talk about everything again, now that we have cost estimates on the enhancement improvements at the 9 crossings, and just kind of get in a room together and discuss all of it. So your point is very well taken. It's a challenge.
And I do have a follow-on. The cost estimates, there really are 2 parts to that cost estimate, I would think. One is the cost of the actual improvement, but then, of course, we have the long-term impact of maintaining those improved crossings, and it would certainly behoove the Public Works folks to understand that so they could include that in their budgeting.
We are on it, absolutely. Excellent point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. Any other comments on this item? Okay, we will look to approve both those items, both those consent items that were pulled and discussed in one motion. Item C, Work Order 24-13, K's and Kilo, Dixon Boulevard, Complete Streets Analysis. And item E, 2023, List of Project Priorities, Amendment Number 1. Do I have a motion from the TAC to approve? Motion from Devin. Do I have a second? Christie, over to you, Philip.
And from the CAC, can I get a motion, please? Motion from Bill and second from Greg. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
From the TAC, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Item passes unanimously. Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to action items. We have 2 action items today. The first one is Resolution 24-1C, PLC-01, Agency Organization and Operation.
Yes, these 2 action items are mine. So this first action item it's really a housekeeping item, but we definitely wanted to bring this to your attention for discussion. Over the past several months, there have been some questions regarding the composition and the eligibility of technical advisory committee members. So clarification was sought from our general counsel. And we also had the discussion with the TPO Executive Committee in March, basically just to kind of review our policy and get their thoughts and their direction. So the current policy states that members, TAC members, shall be employed by or be contracted by the respective appointing agency. So the clarification that we asked for was really related to if an elected official should be eligible to serve on the Technical Advisory Committee. You know, an elected official is not necessarily precluded from membership on the TAC currently, but to be eligible for nomination, the elected official would have to be employed or contracted by the nominating agency. So the executive committee recommended to revise the TAC eligibility language to clarify that no elected official from any local council or county commission shall be able to serve as a representative on the TAC. And so this really clarifies that elected officials shall only be eligible to serve on the TPO governing board. The TAC should consist of members who possess a technical specialty or expertise representing the nominating agency. And the executive committee, we also had a discussion with them related to adding 2 additional seats to the TAC, one from the Housing and Human Services, and the other one from the Space Coast Office of Tourism. So we would be adding 2 more seats to this TAC. And really, the reason for this is with a federal emphasis on equity and, growing concerns over affordable housing, along with the effects, of increased visitors in our area, we really did feel that this was important to have these 2 members added to get their perspectives at the TAC. So, I'll be happy to answer any questions, but we are asking for your approval, Resolution 24-16, amending our agency organization and operation policy.
Thank you, Georgiana. Any questions for Georgiana or discussion on this item?
Yeah, Cliff? Yeah, I have something. I think you should make a recommendation that they add the CAC as well into this, eliminating, keeping elected officials from serving on the Citizens Advisory Committee as well, because, as an elected official, you're not the citizens' point of view, your point of view is as an elected official. So that should really, elected officials shouldn't be allowed to serve on the CAC as well.
So, Laura, that is already very clear. Yes, I mean, for an elected official to be acting as a citizen, the citizens and the TAC members have a very specific role. And, I know Deputy Mayor Frank Geerton, who's been a longstanding member, representing Indian Harbor Beach, hate to see him go. Also, the alternate for him was Councilmember Hamilton Boone. And also Grant Valcaria, I think the alternate for Jason was Mayor Dale Yance. And so there was also a Melbourne Beach elected official that wanted to get on the TAC. So all of this really generated a lot of conversation over the past couple of months. And so this was the recommendation of the executive committee, that we need to keep it for technical members and citizens on this particular board or committees.
Thank you, Christy.
Yeah, the question I have is, how many members does this bring this to? I'm sorry.
Let's see, how many TAC? 28?
With the 2 new positions?
We're 26 now, so we'll go up to 28.
And do you guys ever review the other agencies to see whether you still want to keep them or not?
Yes,
Some of these I haven't seen here.
You want to vote them off the island?
Well, we keep track of membership, and it is included in the agenda package so everyone can see, if a TAC member is representing their agency, I do realize that there are some folks that are, don't attend as much as they, probably should. And as far as Space Coast Office of Tourism and Housing, they need to have a staff member that is going to be able to attend. So that can be a challenge, at times. So we will be reaching out to them to have a meeting and kind of talk about who would be a good fit for this particular committee.
I have a
Ginger.
concern when it comes to the tourism. Isn't that a slightly biased point of view?
How do you, I'm not sure I follow that.
Well, I just think that they'd be totally focused on facilities for the tourist and
Well, I
amenities for
mean-
them versus the trickle down to those of us who actually live here.
I think they would have a very unique perspective. I mean, they see what is happening here in Brevard County. So we need to, I mean, we can't have blinders on. You know, they have, it would be one vote on the Technical Advisory Committee, but I think they would offer a very interesting perspective. And keep in mind, you know, in the federal policy, the feds are telling us we need to be focusing on tourism. So they're saying you need to be looking at this, as well as housing. So this is an area that they
Housing,
want
I get
us
it.
to focus on more. And so I don't understand, I don't think it would be biased. I think they would just have their perspective within Brevard County. You don't agree, huh?
Yeah, Georgiana, if I may too, yeah, it just makes sense, frankly, because, you know, all the aspects of transportation planning that we, you know, look at is, you know, affects tourism. And so for them to have a seat on the Technical Advisory Committee just frankly makes sense. Yeah, Greg?
I'm going to be with Ginger on this one. Sorry.
Okay.
You know, one of my champions since I've gotten here is, you know, we've got this great railroad coming, but I also like to look at bus stops. And, you know, I've worked with Space Coast Area Transit and Jim and the guys and trying to make improvements to bus shelters. And from my perspective as a citizen, I can look at my bus shelters in Cocoa, and I can look at those bus shelters out on the beach, and I know which ones I want to be in. That would be my comment.
Okay, any other comments or questions on this item? As it relates to the eligibility of, you know, members on the TAC, I really agree with the amendment myself, and I just think it's important that, you know, I'm looking at it from the, you know, that the executive committee, you know, thinks strongly of it, and I think that's important for us to take notice of. So that's just my comment. Is there a motion from the TAC for approval of this item? Motion from Steve. Do we have a second? Erica, over to you, sir.
And from the CAC, do we have a motion, please? Motion from Greg and second from Gil. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
From the TAC, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item carries unanimously. All right, we'll move on to our second action item. That's Resolution 24-18, the 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan Amendment.
Okay, that's going to be me. Debbie usually handles the long-range plan amendments, but I am going to handle this one. There are two projects that we want to add to our 2045 long-range transportation plan. The first project is the Cocoa Multimodal Station project. We are adding that to Table 11.3, and we have an estimated cost of roughly around $75 million that is still being dialed in for construction for fiscal year 27 and fiscal year 28. And we also have Space Coast Area Transit's FTA fiscal year 2024 low or no emissions for buses that I discussed earlier. This is a grant program for purchasing electric buses, electric bus infrastructure, and project maintenance. So these two project additions are being added because these two projects are going after discretionary grants. So no, we don't have the funding for the project, but it is very important that you have planning consistency when you go after a discretionary grant. You need to ensure that the project is either incorporated into your list of project priorities and that without question it is within the grant section of the long-range transportation plan. So that is what these two amendments are for. And the Cocoa Multimodal Station, that, we've talked about that, very exciting that, Brightline has announced their intent to develop a station within the city of Cocoa. As I mentioned, I think at the last meeting, now the work really begins because as we know, the inline stations, Aventura, Boca, and Stewart, these were all requests from local governments. And so that Brightline's looking for funding partners, and the same holds true for the Cocoa Station. And so that is what we are doing now, is developing the funding plan. And then, of course, Brightline, that's in partnership with Brightline. So the request is to amend our long-range plan to add these two projects. It does not affect cost feasibility of current or future projects, but we do want to ensure that we have planning consistency. So we are asking for approval of Resolution 24-18.
Thank you, Georgiana. Discussion, comments on this item? Good, Michael.
Is Brightline actually, we have a partnership? Because you're saying the word partnerships, is Brightline actually contributing anything
So far,
financially?
Well, that's yet to be determined. I think right now they're trying to look at the local contribution. There is $12 million in their land contribution. They're having, very close discussions with the city of Cocoa. Tomorrow night, the Brevard County Board of County Commissioners is discussing potentially giving $5 million of the tourism development tax from the county to go towards the station. It's basically trying to, get together the funding for the non-federal match from the Chrissy grant. And that is a grant through the Federal Railroad Administration that is specific for rail operators. So we're still kind of early in the process, but they are definitely looking to the locals to see what can we put on the table, and then from there, we finish out the funding plan to go after and leverage that federal dollar. So it's a good question.
Yeah, I'm all for it as far as the station goes. It just would be nice if there is some contribution from them. Right now, it looks like it's all coming from other sources, and they are just, kind of giving in to us, requesting that station. And it would be good to have them, contribute to that.
Yep. I will tell you, this is in line with how they have handled the other stations as well.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, Eric.
So just following up on the estimate of the 75 million, there was a previous presentation, there was like a feasibility study that we did on this, but I don't know if costing or estimated cost was part of that, or it was more about the location. Maybe you could comment on that. But the part B is, does that number kind of float and change over the next couple years as more assumptions come in that are more concrete and the years get closer? So would that number may end up, at 110 million or 130 or something like that? So how good do we think that estimate is, and what is it based on?
That estimate is based on I think it was the Boca station. I think perhaps our station is going to be more in line with the station in Boca as far as size is concerned. The reason why our estimate is a little bit more than the Boca Brightline station is because there is 4 miles of track that is going to have to be double tracked. Oh. And so that adds to the cost of the station, or of the grant itself. As far as the feasibility study, we are still working on the feasibility study. We have a lot of excellent data related to, potential ridership. A conceptual plan was certainly going to be, part of that, but Brightline is, it's going to be their station. So, I mean, they have to have a big part of that. And so over the past few weeks, you know, since the announcement and our coordination with them and the city of Cocoa, things are starting to become a little more clear on what that looks like. So we're getting close to finalizing that study. I think it's projected for August, but this is moving so fast, you know, since the announcement. So we've put our study in high gear, you might say,
Great.
to get it in line.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyone else? Gil?
Thanks. I just wanted to suggest that since we're in the planning stage, now would be a really good opportunity to, like I mentioned in the last meeting, incorporate the design of a vertiport attached to that facility. Because one day, I feel like you guys are going to regret not having it. And this would be the second one because we already know where the first one's going, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Gil. Anyone else? Questions, comments, discussion on this item?
Mr. Chair, I do want to mention that
Yes.
the grant would be for final design and construction, so perhaps that is something that we can talk with them about.
Great. Okay, from the TAC, I would look for a motion to approve the 2024 Long Range Transportation Plan Amendment. Erica, thank you. Second by Devin. Over to you, sir.
And from the CAC, do we have a motion, please? Motion from Greg. Do we have a second? Second from Arlen. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed?
And from the TAC, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item carries unanimously. That's it for our action items today. We're going to move on to presentations. We have 3 presentations today. The first one is draft list of the 2024 project priorities.
All right, good morning again. Sarah Crom, Senior Transportation Planner. So annually, TPOs are required to adopt a list of project priorities that basically sets out what are our funding priorities and what projects do we seek to move forward over the next 5 years. So we will be presenting the draft today, and then in July asking for recommendation for adoption. You do have a couple things in your agenda package. The first is the actual draft list in our citizens format, so it's a little bit less technical. It's also, there has been a couple changes in estimates and small tweaks. The most up-to-date list will be going on our website either this week or next week, working with Abby to get that out there for citizen review. As well as you also have maps. There was 2 small edits to the maps as well. So things are just, you know, moving a little too quickly to keep up for the agenda package. So anyways, so developing our list of project priorities. So this is essentially where the planning meets the money. It's a multimodal prioritized project list that basically is our opportunity to tell FDOT what projects need to be funded within our area, as well as also prioritize projects for the TPO's federal funding. FDOT programs based upon available revenues, and essentially what this is pursuing is implementing our long-range transportation plan and our master plans that we develop. So we start off with the LRTP, which basically prioritizes into a cost-feasible list. Municipalities have the opportunity to pull projects out of the LRTP and master plans, request that they be put on the list of project priorities, and ultimately they get funded, and that's when they're in the TIP, or the Transportation Improvement Plan. When we're looking at the list of project priorities, it's important to think interregional, from MICO to MEMS. Projects should add value to the transportation and system and community of the Space Coast. So we're trying to think of what are the best projects to advance our whole region forward for quality of life, multi-mobility, transportation, et cetera. It is a rather complicated process that all of these projects go through. So we complete the call for projects. That generally happens January to March. Applications are submitted. TPO staff evaluates and ranks the the projects, and then we move into adoption. But the work is not done when you guys adopt the list of project priorities. We then submit the list of project priorities, as well as also we work with FDOT to create a table of funding recommendations. FDOT takes all of our applications, they review them, we vet them, meet with the locals in regards to them, and then we start project programming, which eventually is work program development, which is generally presented in December. So as I said, this process never stops. And then projects are either implemented by FDOT or through a local agency program project with the municipality. So how are these projects ranked and how do they get here? Basically, we have two scoring methodologies. We have the quantitative score, which I'll review a little bit more in a second in the next slide, and then discretionary ranking. So discretionary ranking is basically any committee or our governing board, and ultimately the governing board has final approval, can say, due to X, Y, and Z, I would like to make a motion that X project be moved to A, B, C position. As far as the quantitative scoring goes, it's a very complicated list of 0 to 100 points with the following screening criteria taken in mind: safety, transportation land use, sustainability and resiliency, innovation, and multi-mobility. This ensures that we are checking all of the FHWA, FDOT, and other planning requirements when we are, as well as also are in line with our governing board strategic plan for which projects are being prioritized. So what's new? What changed this year? So there was some edits made to the current list. The bright lines, the COCO multimodal station was moved from a planning study onto the regionally significant list. So it's not a new project, it's moving forward. I'll explain a little bit more for this next one and the next couple slides, but we did clarify a project on the CIS list to include Malabar Road. There were estimate updates, phase updates, so projects that got funded for a phase had to be updated for the next phase. And then also annually, we review the scores based on the latest state of the system and high entry network. Capacities can change, as well, our volumes can change, as well as also safety can change. And so we need to appropriately update the scores of projects based on those changes in capacity and crashes. So there were two new projects added, which are the two, I'll review them very briefly, but they're the two projects that were added to the list of project priority amendment that we just completed. So as I mentioned, there are those two projects. So it's the Emerson Road Safe Streets for All project. I think Frank did a wonderful job discussing that project earlier, so I'm not going to stay on the slide too much. And then the rail crossing elimination program, which is essentially looking at potentially 9 crossings for safety improvements. So as I mentioned, these two new projects are simply just the projects that we just amended into the current list of project priorities. So they're quote unquote new. As far as our current drafts of list of project priorities, I'm not gonna go through every single project, but just wanna call some highlights out. So as far as our strategic intermodal system, this list of project priorities is really not moving. Mostly that's because of just the incredibly high estimates. As you can see, number 3 and 4 are over $300 million projects. So also, as I mentioned, is number 6 originally was just kind of a generic I-95 intersection improvement, interchange improvement item. We decided due to funding that was put on this intersection, or interchange, as well as also Palm Bay pursuing some federal appropriations for it, that we wanted to clarify that we really need to get the I-95 at Malabar Road interchange moving. FDOT did program a PD&E in fiscal year 25 for $3.5 million, but design is needed, construction needed, potentially right of way, as well as also there's interim improvements identified that Palm Bay is pursuing. Ellis Road, the project that we all know very well, is still our #1 priority, and as Georgiana mentioned, we will be moving forward today with submitting that infra grant. Well, rather, Brevard County will be moving forward today with submitting the infra grant. Our regionally significant list, this is really all of our major roadways and looking at capacity as well as also multimodal improvements. There was some movement, as I mentioned, due to changes in volumes as well as also safety. A1A popped up above Babcock, that project is fully funded. However, we're looking at a way to get a mid-block incorporated into the resurfacing that's coming up. Also, Clear Lake and 524 naturally swapped due to volumes. However, COCO was wanting to swap those projects so that Clear Lake's number one due to basically the Bright Line station coming in, because that is the entryway. Moving on to the next page, there was a little bit of movement, but really not a whole lot. As I mentioned, we did add the COCO multimodal station, and there was some changes in phases, which I'll talk about shortly here in a second. Next page, these, once again, these projects, they swapped due to volumes and capacities. I wanted to draw your attention to 3 projects, as the first one I did briefly mention, the first 2 was Clear Lake Road as well as also 524. Clear Lake Road, we did fund a PD&E update as well as also a design update to get this project ready to take right-of-way and construction. However, that's still a large funding gap, but hopefully we'll be able to start moving that forward. State Road 524, I want to commend the city of COCO as they put up quite a bit of money as well as we filled in the funding gap in order to get this PD&E to move into design to keep this project going. We are probably going to have to look at phasing in regards to construction, but basically due to local commitment is the reason that this project is moving forward. These are critical connections with, Georgiana has mentioned several times that this multimodal station is moving much quicker than I think any of us anticipated, and we really need to be responsive in regards to the roadways that are going to service it. Next one that I want to mention is a very high priority for North Brevard and Titusville is the 405 South Street widening. This project needs a PD&E. However, the Space Coast TPO was able to fund a corridor study, which is essentially the pre-PD&E. Corridor study needs to be completed before it can go into the PD&E. Titusville is sitting with a couple $100,000 waiting to be able to fund the PD&E. However, it's a much larger estimate than a couple hundred. So hopefully over the next several years, we'll be able to get that project moving. All right, our transportation system management and operations. This is all of the technology and innovations and ITS components. There are 3 major projects in Palm Bay that are really, they're construction ready. We need to figure out how to fund them, and that's Malabar Road from St. John's Heritage Parkway to San Felipe, Emerson Drive from Waco to Malabar, and San Felipe Drive from Waco to Malabar. These are critical connections to keep Southern Brevard's traffic moving. And of course, our number 1 project is the Traffic Management Center. Design has wrapped up, and we are anticipating that construction will be completed in the next couple years. So we will all be, in several years, we'll all be somewhere else other than the Center for Collab for these meetings. Bicycle and pedestrian projects. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Jackson Avenue in the next slide. But I did want to draw the attention that almost all of these projects are state roads. And so it really highlights the sidewalk gaps that we're experiencing on state roads and the coordination collaboration that we need to be making to fill these critical sidewalk gaps. As I mentioned, Jackson Ave Complete Street, this is a project with Satellite Beach. We were able to fill in the funding utilizing transportation alternative and carbon reduction funds, as well as also Satellite Beach put up money as well. And so once again, highlighting that the projects that are moving forward are where we're able to get these funding partnerships going with multiple funding agencies coming together. Sun Trails Network, we actually had quite a bit of movement. Normally I'm like, nothing's changed on our Sun Trails Network, but something's exciting. So just Friday, I found out that the funding for the Space Coast Trail, our number 1 project, the construction funding has been moved up to fiscal year 25. So we will anticipate our coast to coast be completed 2 years sooner than originally anticipated. We did receive 2 Sun Trail funding allocations this year, which is the East Coast Greenway, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the next slide. And then also you all approved a North Merritt Island Pioneer Trail feasibility work order at the last meeting, and we've started that feasibility study. We did remove one project, and that was the Space Coast Trail section in Canaveral National Seashore. This was requested by the agency due to resiliency concerns of adding additional assets onto their property. As far as the East Coast Greenway project goes, this is the City of Titusville project being implemented by FDOT. It's from State Road 50 to Grace Street. The design was originally funded, however, due to unknowns with the right-of-way, they are having to put a chunk of that design into right-of-way surveying before they can actually go into design. So we need to figure out how to fill that gap on finishing the design and then move into construction. Planning and studies, as you can see, all of these green highlighted ones are either underway by FDOT or will be underway by the TPO, so we are incredibly busy. Or in regards to number 9, that is going under contract with the City of Melbourne. Grants and other funding, this is a non-ranked list. This list is really there in order for our municipalities and our partners to be able to showcase their project when submitting for these federal grants. And as I mentioned, Emerson Road and rail crossing elimination was added. Here is a map of all of our fully funded projects. It's also within your agenda package. So where do we go from here? So currently, we are presenting to you, as well as also the TPO Governing Board, the draft. We'll then take the draft out to the public through several workshops, but specifically our public open house on June 12th this year. We'll then take it to the BPAC, and then we'll request the TAC, CAC, and Governing Board approval. But as I said, it doesn't stop there. We transmit it to FDOT. We work over the next 5 months or so to basically work with them to develop the work program and get these projects funded and under control. And then we start it all over again with, that should actually say 2025, with call for projects again. So it's a year-long cycle. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. As I mentioned, we are not looking for a motion today. We are simply just presenting the draft.
Chrissy?
One comment about the Ellis Road and the right-of-way acquisition funding. I'm wondering if the phase is going to take longer than 2025, and I say that from the technical perspective because, FDOT has done, all their cure analysis and whatnot, and I think we're just starting to hear from some of the property owners hiring their own professional teams to counter that. So I'm just giving you guys an FYI. As a professional, I'm starting to see that. And then the other question I have is I heard Sarah talk about volume sometimes sort of bumps up priorities. And you have more volume on Mitten than you have Hollywood. So I'm wondering what happened there.
I'd have to specifically go and look at the scoring. It might not have been volumes. It might have been safety that caused them. They basically, I believe, are 1 point away. So if there's any minor change in, volumes or safety, it can cause those to sit there and go like this over the years.
Okay, so you're saying they're 1 point difference between the two?
It's either 1 or 2 points. They are so close, ranked, that smallest little change can cause those to.
Yeah, because the right-of-way acquisition costs on Hollywood are unreal.
They
So
are.
that's why,
I
to me,
just updated them last week.
Mitten is a better
yes.
bang for the buck. In my opinion.
The right-of-way estimates are not accurate in your agenda package on Hollywood.
Yeah, Eric?
So one thing that's not completely clear from the presentation is like examples of funding sources. So let me bring up one just kind of to highlight that maybe we can talk about. So on the high priority list, we have 268 million is needed for number 4. So that's probably the highest dollar amount in the presentation. Actually, that's an updated slide from the packet. Okay, great. So it's a bigger number.
It's even bigger.
Yeah, so 365 and 329. So can you give some examples of the types of grants and sources from either the state or the federal government that would make up the 365 or the 329, and what would be sort of a rough sort of timeline on when the process would be going to get that? Because it seems like that might come from like 7 different sources or something.
So this is specifically the strategic intermodal system list, and so there is a dedicated funding source for projects of this on the SIS system. However, at this time, neither of those 528 projects are within the SIS cost feasible, if I'm correct, Georgiana.
Correct. We have not received the final cost feasible plan yet from the department, but the draft did not include any of those are SIS projects. SIS projects are of high priority, of statewide significance.
Okay.
And of course, Ellis actually is on that list, even though it is not a state road. And so that is a challenge. Kathy with DOT is going to be presenting on funding and kind of the different pots of money, but 75% of the department's funding goes to the SIS, because this is really, these projects are the backbone of Florida. 528, I-95, Ellis Road, I mean, these are major projects that go to our modes. We don't have I-95 on here because as of right now, there's not an I-95. There is an I-95 PD&E for Malabar.
Malabar, correct.
But the department is not pursuing the 8-laning of I-95 throughout Brevard County right now, but it may very well be coming because we're starting to see certain segments that are over capacity. But funding is a challenge. So we'll get a nice education from Kathy during the next presentation on the different funding pots.
So 75% of the potential funding comes from this SIS list or SIS allocation, you're saying?
From central office.
Okay.
They are in charge of the statewide pots of funding for the SIS plan. So those projects are not funded out of the district. They're funded out of central office, and they use each of the district's priorities, and then they fund as many of those SIS projects as they can. And as of right now, we're not in the cost feasible plan.
Just number 1 is on the list.
Number 1's not on the list.
Oh, it's not on the list, okay.
There's been no SIS money that has went to the widening of Ellis or any other phase
And
for
that
that
is
matter.
another good example, though, of funding partnerships, is Brevard County, the City of Melbourne, City of West Melbourne, Space Coast TPO, has all put money into Ellis in order to get it ready for the INFRA grant.
I'm just surprised, that the federal government doesn't have enormous grant programs that would help fund some of these.
Well, to your point, and that is a very good point, I know Secretary Tyler has talked about ways to try and get 528 and the 401 bridge funded. And his idea is potentially perhaps going after a mega grant, through the US DOT, so a discretionary grant, and combine all of both sections of segments of 528 and the 401 bridge. But, you got to come up with the
20% match.
well, actually, for infra and for mega, it's 40%.
Oh, yes.
And so therein lies the challenge. But, perhaps, get DOD involved. I mean, the importance of the 401 bridge, I mean, it's huge. And
Which, to Georgiana's point of DOD, is, the Eastern Florida Regional Planning Council is conducting a military installation and resilience review. Several people actually within this room participated in workshops, and we consistently were hammering to the consultants that are doing that project, and essentially that project is to work with DOD about projects that support not just the installation, but the community that supports the installation. And so we were consistently pushing 401 and the 528 projects as vital connections to not just the military installations, but the workers getting there in Port Canaveral and all the intricacies that go into supporting our Space Force, NO2, and Coast Guard.
Thank you.
Anything else for Sarah?
Yes, Sarah, I have a question on the State Road 401. Why isn't FDOT the applicant for that project?
Who do we have as the applicant?
Number 5.
I mean, it probably should say FDOT/Port Canaveral, but I mean, really, Port Canaveral you guys are the main person that is being served by that roadway. But I think you're probably right that we should say FDOT/Port
Yeah,
Canaveral.
because if it's going to be bundled with 528, it should still have that link with FDOT.
Yep, that's an easy change to say FDOT/Port Canaveral.
Okay, thank you. Anything else for Sarah?
Yeah, Cliff?
Yep.
Yeah, if I may, Frank, I don't know if you want to say anything about item number 6 on this list. That's the I-95 interchange. If not, I will.
It is a priority. Just to let you know, again, it's a priority from our city. It's a priority for our mayor. He is the one who's taking the lead. Just be upfront about it. He sent letters to the FDOT and trying to get some improvements done. We've had an operational study completed by FDOT. We appreciate. Within that FDOT operational study, they identified some improvements. The city is now taking itself with federal lobbyists to start getting some additional funds to do some of those design improvements. We then appreciate the DOT then funding for this coming year for the PD&E study. But it is an improvement that's needed. I-95, if you don't know it, for our Matador Road, it's congested. It's mainly the off-ramp ramps heading southbound. It backs up onto the freeway and it becomes an issue. Our mayor is real concerned that there's going to be a fatality on that roadway, and because of that, he's real concerned that we need to take action now. And so if it's FDOT, now he's moving on to operations from a enforcement standpoint. He's trying to reach out to the state troopers and see what can be done to get their support. So it's something that our city is not going to let go, because it's a priority to take care of the residents and the commuters of that corridor. And so it's a priority for us. And unless, Phil, you want to add something more to it?
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Yeah, that's why I wanted to get some input from you on it as well. I mean, if anybody ever tries to take that exit, especially coming home in the afternoon, it's just absolutely horrendous. It's an extremely dangerous accident. We've already had one death on there. You see people cutting in. Traffic is backed all the way up onto 95 itself because the exit lane simply isn't long enough. So, if you look at here, the PD&E has been funded for next year, which is great. The design isn't funded. It's tentatively scheduled for 2027. It's not funded. If this continues, when will, if the design gets funded in 2027, construction will not be funded until, 28, 29, 30. It's an absolutely untenable situation and has to be addressed, frankly, before that. Thank you, sir.
Phil.
Thank you. Anything else for Sarah?
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Good job this morning, Sarah. All right, our next presentation is the FDOT Fair Share Funding Distribution.
Mr. Chair, as Kathy is coming up, I just wanted to kind of remind the members that Kathy was here and it was Lisa that presented to the TACCAC.
Yep, Lisa came.
And she, in December, and presented on the tentative work program. And there was quite a bit of discussion about the lack of funding for our priorities. And so hopefully we didn't beat Lisa up too much. And of course, it was all in good faith of trying to understand, and making sure that we are getting our fair share. So we asked the department to come back, and so Kathy's here. She has a really good presentation and just kind of talk about the different funding pots and the fair share as well, so that we can feel more comfortable and just be educated on that. So we do appreciate it very much.
Good. I appreciate that, Georgiana. Yep, Kathy Alexander Corbin, and I represent the Program Management Office. I'm the Program Management Administrator at District 5. So last time we came, we were talking about the tentative work program, and that was for fiscal years 25 through 29. And today what I want to do is kind of go back and see what leads to that. There's a lot of processes, a lot of coordination, a lot of functions that take place, that Sarah had actually mentioned earlier. That actually lead us to building that tentative work program. And so we felt it would be useful to come back and share some of that macro knowledge. It's very high level. I will say funding is almost its own separate entity of where everything comes from, and you need the specialist to come and tell you exactly how all of that is distributed. It could be the work program instructions is a manual that's 1,000 pages long, and for me to talk about it and condense it into an hour would be impossible. But we do want to give you, some insight as to some of those constraints, the challenges that we see as building the work program, and also just what goes into it. Oops. All right, so let's talk work program. So this is the department's mission, and I'm pretty certain that it aligns with the missions of all of our local partners. Really what we want to do is deliver impactful projects to our communities. Vital to supporting our mission is our FDOT compass, and these are principles that guide us when we're vetting projects and discussing projects for potential programming in the tentative work program. Some key items that you see here are represented in those directions of the compass, but at the core is always the community. It's really what we want to do is how can we improve the community with projects that improve safety, that enhance our resiliency, that strengthen our supply chain, leverage innovative technologies through all of the activities in the facing to deliver this project, even to maintain it and then keep it operational. We want to contribute to the workforce development for the region, for the county, the district, and the state. And again, also with the focus that it's all community-centric. Now, Brevard is unique in that we have several other modes of transportation outside of the other counties. We have seaport and spaceport. And so that actually takes a different spin on the kind of funding that is represented in the work program for the county. And it does represent a large magnitude. And so we do have colleagues from our modal office that will be talking to that a little bit later. So here is the framework for developing the tentative work program. We presented last year, like I mentioned, we talked about the projects and the programmings for the upcoming 5 years. But what you see here is actually the steps that it takes to get us there. And just as a refresher, the work program is a 5-year plan of transportation activities and projects developed in partnership with our communities, local governments, state and federal agencies, our metropolitan and transportation planning organizations, modal partners, and regional stakeholders. In the first few panels, you see where the coordination takes place. This is actually a process that takes 1.5 years. By the time we come and visit to present the tentative work program, we're about halfway or 2/3 into it. But it really does lead into a lot of collaboration, a lot of identifying what the needs are, what are the costs, what are the benefits, what is the timing for these projects that are going to be introduced into the work program. The department with our needs, as well as our local agencies and the MPOs and TPOs actually prepare all this information similar to what Sarah presented here with a list of priority projects, and we identify those regional priorities that will be submitted for possible programming in the upcoming tentative work program. So we're all busy collaborating through all of this as well, identifying what those priorities are. So eventually the needs are reviewed and they are aligned with laws, policies, program objectives, and the priorities, and we build a plan that is balanced to available resources. And this is revenues, essentially state and federal revenues. In that process of balancing, projects may be added into the work program. They may shift, which means that they could be deferred, deleted, moved on to a later, phases may change, and this is all based on available funding and/or the level of project readiness. In the middle panel, you see here, we go from the identifying the priorities, they get submitted to the department. That includes all of the priorities that we have for the district as well. And all of we balance those. We build the program individually at each of the districts. That is then combined and submitted to central office, and that becomes the statewide tentative work program. That is then submitted to legislature and to the governor for review, approval, and ultimate adoption come July 1st of each year. We have funding priorities that we follow. This is the philosophy that we follow in terms of programming in the tentative work program, and as well as throughout the year. Really, first and foremost is safety. We look at safety across all of our programs as our top priority. Next, we meet all of the system preservation and maintenance objectives, some of which are Florida statute mandated, such as our pavement, our state highway pavement condition, as well as our state-maintained bridges, repairs and replacement, and maintenance of our state highway systems. Next, we have statutorily required allocations, which we must do. 15% of the funding of the allocation goes towards public transportation, and that includes aviation, transit, rail, and ports. We must put aside 1.5% of our work program towards landscaping. And then there's other programs that are statutorily required that also receive allocations, such as our County Incentive Grant Program, Small County Outreach Programs, also known as SCOP and SCRAP, and then also our TRIP, which is our Transportation Regionally Improvement Program. I may have gotten the I wrong, but incentive program, I got that right. TRIP, so it's Transportation Regional Incentive Program. And then lastly is what remains is what is considered towards the capacity. We attempt to try to balance the 25% towards the strategic intermodal system and 25% towards the arterials. And as Georgiana had mentioned, these are a network of high-priority transportation facilities that really contribute to the state's economy and mobility improvements, economic growth. Now, there are many programs with dedicated funding allocations. Some of them are statutorily mandated, and others are population-derived formulas, and they're managed in two areas. We have statewide programs, which are managed by central office, and these funds are allocated to central office, sometimes with the input of the district for what the needs may be for those different funding pots. Some of the examples that you see there, we have interstate resurfacing is managed out of our central office. We have bridge replacement. We mentioned the Strategic Intermodal Systems, or the SIS program. Rest area funding also comes out of the central office managed program, way stations, Sun Trail, and safe routes to school. The other programs are managed from a district level. And this is where the funds are allocated by statutory formula and also set up for needs-based criteria and/or set up by needs-based criteria. And the examples for the local jurisdiction, the district jurisdiction on those fundings, we have arterial resurfacing, bridge repair, safety, the County Incentive Grant Program, and the Transportation Regional Incentive Program. There's also a few programs that kind of overlap. There's funding that's allocated both at the statewide and the district level. Those are the ITS, Intelligent Transportation Systems, as well as some of our modal programs. Now, we have over 100 funding sources that we manage on many projects over at FDOT. And it's really contingent on several factors: the type of roadway and the type of work that's being proposed. Typically, when we have needs that are identified, it's always a matter of where's that roadway, what's the jurisdiction, what is the context of the roadway, is it a state roadway, is it an off-system, what are we trying to improve? Are we providing safety components? Are we doing operational improvements? Are we trying to improve resiliency? All of these factors come into play when we're trying to allocate funding sources towards that project. It's a possibility that there may be various funding sources that are applied to a project. I think the question was asked here. Sometimes it's federal, sometimes it's state, sometimes it's a combination of both. Sometimes we look at the type of work that's being provided and we split up. A certain amount, maybe safety or trail component, and we'll add that kind of funding for that portion of the project, where the remaining may be resurfacing. And then arterial resurfacing funding is used for that. So we really go through the effort of trying to see how can we leverage and maximize, optimizing the type of fundings that we have across all of our projects. Like I mentioned, some of the criteria for what kind of funding could be used on a project could be statutory mandated, if it's either a bridge repair or resurfacing, either interstate or arterial, or some kind of resiliency type. It's also based on the roadway eligibility and type of work, like I mentioned. And then it also does require sometimes collaborative funding, and that could be either through central office, statewide programs, local partners, as well as our MPO and TPO. Just because we all have a shared need for the project. All right, this is the important one, because I know we wish we had enough to cover everything, but there's factors that impact our work program. Revenues. Recall that a way that we have to balance a plan. We have to build and balance a plan against the anticipated state and federal revenues that are available, the sources that are there to back up what we say we're going to put out. State taxes and fees, along with federal aid, make up the primary funding sources for the work program. There's also additional funding sources such as tolls collected on certain facilities. There's proceeds from bond issuances, as well as local taxes and fees. These vary from year to year, and depending on the economic conditions and the market conditions, the projections that are developed to support the work program will also vary. Several times throughout the year, there is an estimating conference that takes place where economists for the state actually get together and project out what those impacts may be. And those projections were used to support the tentative work program. We also have decisions, policies, and statutes that affect how funding distribution takes place. As our regions evolve, so does the transportation needs for the county, the district, the state, and these decisions, policies, and statute change as a result of this. And we also have economic variables. Given the magnitude of projects that we have, inflation could be a significant factor to maintaining these projects to full delivery. The cumulative impact of inflation in the last few years has really compounded trying to maintain the projects that were planned in past tentative work programs. And we've also, that's been somewhat impacted as well by a recovering supply chain constraints coming out of the pandemic, as well as limiting, I should say, there's also been shortages, limiting resources, not just for materials, but as well as workforce to be able to carry out the construction for these projects. So overall, it does create an impact, not just for trying to add capacity projects, but also non-capacity projects for the department. Even small projects that could be improvements, we don't have the funding for because we're trying to absorb those estimate increases on projects that are already programmed. Still taking into account that there's priority that does get introduced into the work program, but it just makes it more difficult. So when the sources exceed the cost, being able to accommodate any more projects into the work program and the new ones becomes a difficulty, it's a challenge. When the costs exceed the sources, difficult decisions have to be made to try to balance against what's available. And that limits the opportunity to add new items into the work program. So for capacity specifically, I mentioned we have funding priorities. That is the order of magnitude of which the priority process that we go through when we introduce projects into the work program or keep them within the work program. We have our safety, our pavement preservation, bridge preservation, as well as highway maintenance. Those all become precedent against what the resources are. And in a time when we have limited revenues or revenues are really slow and growing, then that really becomes the focus for what we can program. We also have the statutory required allocations, which those are mandated by law. So we can't waive from those. Those also have to be included. So it becomes a challenge. As the costs increase for those items that are priorities above, it limits what's available down below for capacity. Now, inversely, if cost stabilizes or reduces of some of the items, inflation goes down, revenues increases, then the opportunity for capacity projects and new projects will grow again. And that's what we're really hoping for. We have seen some stabilizing of costs, I shall say, over the last year. However, it's not significant enough to be able to say that, hey, we're now going to be able to add all those items that we could not add in the past. Inflation is still there, and we're still seeing increases, but just not to the extent that we saw in 2022, where it was, for resurfacing alone, we saw over 26.5% cost increases for paving, and that was significant to our work program. So here's the tool that we review on a regular basis. Georgiana refers to it as the fair share. In reality, for us, we call it the work program compared to the statutory formula, which is really a population-based formula. We look at this on a regular basis just to see how programming is represented across all of our counties. It's kind of an equity assessment. It's not the only thing we looked at, but we do go back and refresh on this, not only throughout the year, but also when we build the tentative work program. And what it does, it compares programming with the statutory formula, which entails population, like I mentioned, but you have to be careful because we do not allocate all the funds in this manner based on statutory formula. The department actually allocates the funds in accordance with statutory mandates, federal law, and department policy. So the majority of the funds within the tentative work program are actually allocated as required by some other method outside of the statutory formula. But it does give us good insight, and we should refer to this when we're making decisions as to what the priorities may be and where we want to be able to bring in needs from different counties. So on the left-hand side, you see specifically to Brevard County, and this is only first district programs. You saw where I showed earlier, there's central office statewide, and then there's the district. This is strictly for the funds that are managed at the district level. And based on 100% of statutory formula, 15.9% would be a good representation of funding coming to Broward County. We also look at the 80%. These are benchmarks that we're striving for. If we can't achieve 100, maybe we do 80%. So at 80%, 12.7% of our work program should go to Brevard County. It looks in the past 5 years, and we were at 11.7%. Shy of that, we didn't hit the 80, we didn't hit the 100%. If you look at the upcoming 5 years, which would be 25 to 29, it's actually 14%. So we're exceeding the 80% benchmark, but we're not hitting the 100%. And if you look at the overall 10-year percentage of the district for Brevard County, we're at 12.9, so just over the 80%. This varies significantly. There's a lot of factors that come into this. So I say that this is a guide. This is programs managed by the district, which means that there is the intent to be able to meet the needs that we can at the district level. The challenge becomes at the statewide level, because SIS, a major capacity supporting program, it cannot allocate all the needs throughout the state. And so, yes, Brevard has not had a project represented in the SIS program, and that would help out significantly for the county. But if you look at the district-wide, and that includes all funds, the entire program, it could be state, it could be federal, it could be incentives. We had Moving Florida Forward funding that came through. We also had the bipartisan infrastructure law that also injected funding into the work program. This includes everything. And here you can see that Orange County is actually at 25% for 10-year representation within the work program in terms of funds. And then you have Osceola at 18%. We've had large projects in the Moving Florida Forward initiatives, which actually is represented here in these figures. And then you have Brevard at 12%, as well as Seminole at 12%. The programs that came through from the governor's initiative, as well as the bipartisan infrastructure law, were funds that were outside of our revenue-supported work program. That was funds that were injected. They're almost like a microcosm of the work program. So those would not be represented in statewide numbers or in the district programs, because those were outside of what we would receive normally from revenues, taxes, and fees. So very high-level overview. Just wanted to share how that allocation takes place. Again, you could really detailed about work program and how everything is funded, but at least this gives you a high-level idea of why certain programs receive funding without the discretion of the district, because they may be managed at a different level, or there may be other needs, or there may be other funding sources. Everything is very specific. There's different flavor codes to each of the different funding sources, and so sometimes we're not able to interchange those. But we do try to leverage, depending on type of work that is occurring on a project, across different projects. With that, I'll go ahead and open up for any comments or questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments for Kathy?
Yeah, Greg.
Yeah, Kathy. The district-wide pie chart is rather interesting. It would be nice to overlay that with the actual ask. So, you know, we're getting 12%, but 12% doesn't cover all of our ask, you know, and so it would be interesting to lay the ask over that so that you can kind of compare how everybody's doing compared to everybody else, which I think is the $64,000 question.
Agreed.
Eric, you had something?
Well, just out of curiosity, I looked at the population of a couple of the counties, and Osceola is definitely curious because their population is 383,000, and they have 18%. So without knowing all the facts off the top of your head, perhaps about other counties, are there some statewide projects that happen to go through a county like Osceola that would disproportionately raise their allocation compared to ours that maybe benefit other counties?
Now, just for clarification, this is not representing allocations. This is just representing the funds that are programmed, and that could be all types of funds.
Okay.
So this is really the funding that we have programmed for 10 years, 5 years back, 5 years forward, and that includes moving forward a forward initiative funding as well as the ARPA funding that came out of that bipartisan infrastructure law. So it could be possible. I think they did have a project, Osceola. They had an extension of a project and then moving forward or forward, and that could be represented in these figures. So it's not a representation of allocation. But that's why I say it's a tool.
I understand.
It's a tool. And so we need to be able to go in and look and take out those incentive, maybe whatever those incentive programs were, and then be able to look apples to apples to see, okay, population-wise in the comparison, how does it compare? But what I wanted to do is just give you the overall picture of what each of the counties are for all funding.
Gotcha.
Georgiana, you have something?
Yes. Excellent presentation, Kathy, and I think Allison is going to come up and just have a few slides on the different modes and the specific funding pots, which I think will be very helpful. And I think to Eric's point, when we were talking about this last week, I did not notice Osceola County's 18%. Their 100% of their fair share is only 8.2, and right now they're at 18%. So it has got to be a moving Florida Forward project, I would assume, because that is a huge hike for them.
We can pull that and continue, but definitely, again, it represents all funding. And moving Florida Forward skewed numbers for Orange County. When you look at those, significant amount of funding was provided from general revenue to those counties. And unless you take those out, it really doesn't give you, this is just for informational purposes, but it really would not be able to give you that comparison of population one county to the other.
Yes, and so the district's very good about sharing the fair share report that I can look at. And at statewide meetings, I have learned that not all MPOs get their hands on this. It doesn't happen. So I appreciate you sharing this information with us so we can understand, what is happening across the district. One of the things, we're looking at 10 years, and it's a challenge. So you're looking at a historical version from 2019 to 2023 and what has been programmed in the DOT work program, and then you're looking at our TIP, basically, which is fiscal year 24 through 28. And we're a little below our fair share historically, but yet it appears as if we're, we are, 10-year, we're at 14.1 for the planned, as you said. Actually.
It'd be the 14 and be the second from the bottom, the 5-year plan.
Yes, okay. Yes, 14. And so looking in the work program for capacity projects, that's where we have Ellis programmed right-of-way and construction. And also some right-of-way funding for 528, the widening of 528. We have State Road 524, which I think also includes not only local funding as well as a part of this, and then our Transportation Management Center that Sarah had presented on, which is a $16 million project. So those are our major projects, and it includes SU, which is the TPO's funding. But, we are right there within this category, and, from the December meeting, our challenge was we didn't get any moving Florida Forward projects. We didn't get any of the stimulus funding that was out there. But clearly, taking all of this into account, we're not very low. We're not where I would like us to be. I would like us to be at that, the 18% or the 20%. But I appreciate you sharing this, and I think it helps us to feel better overall about what is going on in the district from a funding perspective.
Yeah, and I just share the sentiment from management as well. They understand that, and that's why it's so important when we go in and we talk about the needs, we share this report with them as well, and we're all looking at it, and they understand what are the needs for Brevard County, and there's already conversations underway, and there will be more conversations underway as we step into the tentative work program for the next 5 years.
So Kathy, one last question before Allison. On the statutorily required allocations, you said 15% goes to public transportation. And that includes, did you say aviation, port?
Correct.
And space, but space as well?
The space, I'm not certain. I will have to, it is included. Okay, Allison, she's got my back.
So at
Yes.
least 15%? Okay, all right.
Yes.
That is something I did not realize that was grouped into public transportation within that category. Okay.
All right, great segue for Allison McCuddy from our Moto Group. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good morning. Just to kind of segue on that 15% does include the modes. Right now, the way the system is set up is space is still a part of the aviation program because originally that's how it was set up. We have since broken out space into its own mode. I'm kind of going to touch on that through my presentation, but yeah, we can, Brian might be able to answer some more questions on that whole 15%, but yeah, all of the modes are allocated within there. And it is generally more than that 15%.
Sure. I mean, I would hope that it would be more than 15% for all those modes.
So, good morning. I am Allison McCuddy, Freight and Logistics Manager of Modal Development in District 5. I work with spaceports, seaports, airports, and freight. Here to talk to you today about, sorry, Cliff, left out aviation a little bit, so you can, but primarily about the space program, and then I'm going to touch on Port Canaveral as well, or the Seaport program. I'm excited to talk about some of the programs as we work towards Florida becoming the global and interplanetary center for sustainable aerospace commerce by becoming the national and worldwide leader. FDOT and Space Florida work closely together, planning and facilitating space transportation services on spaceport properties. We work together to plan and fund strategic and sustainable spaceport projects to foster interagency efforts to improve space transportation capacity and efficiency. There were 72 launches in calendar year 2023, which included 69 payload missions and 3 crewed missions from Brevard County. Total payload was over 2 million pounds to orbit. We continue to reach new all-time records as 2024 is on pace to eclipse the 2023 totals. The District 5 Spaceport Office produces and manages grants that provide funds to Space Florida to implement projects such as orbital processing facilities, launch complexes, runways, manufacturing, and payload integration facilities. Only spaceport territories are eligible for FDOT space funding. Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, right here in Brevard County, are the only active spaceport territories in Florida at this time. Space capacity projects attract and grow the space industry, which has a great impact to economic development in our region. Florida recognizes space in the same manner as other long-established modes, such as roads, rail, airports, and seaports. In 2019, the FDOT established a spaceport office, aligning spaceports and space transportation with other modes and dedicating funding to the mode. This funding allocation demonstrates Florida's ongoing commitment to invest in the state's growing spaceport transportation system. 93% of the spaceport project funding is used to build the projects, while the remainder of the funds are used for planning and support. We are developing a world-class industrial park for the space industry through our infrastructure projects. We encourage spaceports to use FDOT funds for projects that ensure a facility's financial sustainability. Sites have become available for repurposing to support commercial operations. As a result, we have taken a very active role in planning and funding spaceport infrastructure to support and accelerate this process. This expanding role led to the Spaceport Improvement Program, which has already produced significant partnerships with commercial space launch and spacecraft operators. These partnerships are integral parts in securing Florida's place as the global leader in space transportation. Although grants are often written as 50-50 grants, as you can see, the aerospace partners generally put in well over the 50% share of the project. Aerospace partners have invested substantial amounts in space-related capital improvements. We are building infrastructure for launch service providers of all sizes. Until infrastructure is in place, rockets cannot launch and smaller launch service providers will not come to Florida. These investments advance Florida's leadership in civil, commercial, and military aerospace activity while creating jobs, economic growth, and mitigating the impacts of federal program realignments. I also work with Port Canaveral as our one port in District 5. For the Seaport program, the majority of the funding comes from two sources that are statutorily driven as well. The Florida Seaport Transportation and Economic Development Program, or FSTED, has dedicated funding from the State Transportation Trust Fund. Examples of projects eligible for funding include transportation facilities within the jurisdiction of the port, dredging or deepening of channels, turning basins or harbors, the construction of rehabilitation of wharfs, docks, structures, jetties, piers, and seaport master plans or strategic development or updates. Strategic plan development or updates. Another program is the SPI, or the Strategic Port Investment Initiative. Projects funded through this source meet the state's economic goal of becoming a hub for trade, logistics, and export-oriented activities. Like you said, brief. So I'm here to answer any questions that you guys have.
Any questions for Allison?
Well,
Georgiana, go ahead.
I would just say, wow, what a return on investment for the aerospace partners to put in 80%, and then the department to.
Correct, and that is just on the project. That number is just on the projects that we participate in.
Correct.
The commercial service launch providers do many projects that we do not have any share in.
Yeah. So, and the port as well, Port Canaveral. I think that these investments are so important for Brevard County. Aviation as well at the airport. I mean, these are our powerhouses, so to speak. And so, I think that's why we, at the TPO level, are concerned about making sure that our modal agencies have good access to and from, and that we don't have any problems, down the pike. But yeah, I really do appreciate that. Now, just to be sure I understand, as far as the fair share is concerned, is that included within the fair share? I don't think
that was a note I wrote down
is.
to follow up with Kathy on.
So
Because-
when you look at the left-hand side and when we're talking only about district programs, that does not include any of the funding.
This is all statewide programs coming out of.
It's all part of the percentage that you saw.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, thank you. It's all part of what was shown in the pie chart. That is part of the funding that is represented. It's the statewide programs and district programs on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, it was strictly district programs.
Gotcha. Okay. Very good.
Question?
Christy, you had something?
Yep. So how do we compare as a nation to like Guyana? I think that was kind of like the emphasis was to put a lot into, all the commercial space industry, because you had companies that were going to Guyana and they were finding out that they didn't have the support, type of technology that we have over here. So what is our ranking? I haven't kept up with that.
So I work predominantly inside the state of Florida. So I saw Steve took the microphone, so I'm going to hope he can back me up on that answer.
Yeah, I probably can't answer your question directly, but to the point that Florida is investing in our national asset being Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And really, I can't speak to Guyana. There hasn't been a lot of flights out of there by the French in a while. But we are competing nationally with Texas, who's putting hundreds of millions of dollars into developing spaceports on the Gulf of Mexico. And also, we compete with Virginia quite a bit. So, you know, even though the spaceport development funds fall within the Brevard County District 5, they are intended for statewide. And I'm very grateful that that space is a form of transportation, and the growth has been tremendous. But what we don't want to do is just assume that it'll continue to be like that, because there is a lot of national and international competition, like you're pointing out.
Yes, Mike.
Thank you. Just like to find out if there's been any impacts and future projects planned in the port regarding, in relationship to the Baltimore bridge collapse. And
As far as I know, right now, there have not been any changes across the state. Specific to Port Canaveral, I am not aware of any, but I don't know if Bob or Veronica can provide any insight on that. We don't, the bridge doesn't see those very large ships the way it's set up now, the way our port's set up, but sorry to deflect all the questions.
Yeah,
The experts are in the room.
Thank you. I can answer that quickly. The ship that impacted the bridge was a container cargo ship. We have a very small portion of that occurs at Port Canaveral. Most of it is with the military sea lift. Certainly, we would welcome if the ship could get in there, but I think, you know, based on the size, it's probably not going to be a huge impact. It may, you know, you have other container ports in Florida, such as Port Everglades, Miami, and Jacksonville. They may see increased business, but.
just curious. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Arlen.
Interesting on this last clip here, you know, 11:34 this morning, we got SpaceX going up, and it's 10:34 tonight.
Yeah, if I heard it was 10:34.
Two astronauts going, they're still going up, I think, aren't they?
Yes.
Yep.
It was scheduled, yeah. All right, interesting, thank you.
Anyone else? I will say, for somebody like me who represents one of the modal partners at Melbourne Orlando International Airport, the FDOT is instrumental in you know, supporting our airport and all the airports in our county, District 5, and you know, many of the projects that, you know, we have done would not be possible without their support and funding. And just as a state goes, the FDOT is more supportive than any other state agency in aviation as a modal partner in our country. So we're very, very fortunate to have the FDOT as a partner, and you know, appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more presentation. It's on the Cocoa and Rockledge School Routes Analysis.
Good morning. I'll try to make this fast because we're getting on time. My name is Debbie Flynn with Space Coast TPO. I'm a transportation planner there. And I would like to thank the city of Rockledge and Cocoa, the Brevard School District, Brevard Public Schools, and FDOT for this project. The School Route Analysis Project identified routes to school projects. These include projects that improve bicyclist, pedestrian, and driver safety and mobility. This was the first time that high schools was able to be part of a school route analysis project. That's why we had driver safety in there. In 2019 and 2022, the first round of analysis was conducted in the cities of Melbourne and Palm Bay. This past year, we conducted studies in the city of Cocoa and Rockledge, which included 9 schools. The study process collected existing conditions and analysis followed by the school coordination meetings and field reviews. After that, draft recommendations were compiled and then sent to the stakeholders and school staff for review. Finally, revised recommendations and the final reports were created and slowly uploaded onto the Space Coast TPO's Safe Routes to School webpage. School coordination meetings verified existing conditions, gathered additional information, and identified issues and opportunities within school campus and study area. Existing conditions and maps were prepared ahead of time and annotated during the meeting as seen on the map to the right. Stakeholders and participants included school principals, assistant principals, school resource officers, Brevard Public Schools facilities and transportation staff, the City of Rockledge and COCO staff, Brevard County Traffic Operations staff, Space Coast TPO, and our consultant Kittleson and Associates. After the coordination meetings, field reviews were conducted to see how traffic moved in and around the school. We reviewed walking and bicycling routes, observed drop-off and pickup activity, and verified existing conditions, particularly the sidewalk and bicycle infrastructure. City staff, Brevard County Traffic Operations staff, and the project team from the Space Coast TPO and Kittlesons conducted the field review. Across 9 schools, there were general recommendations, including filling sidewalk gaps, restriping high visibility crosswalks, adding flash and beacon signage for existing school zones and appropriate markings, and installing or upgrading pedestrian ramps. Additional crossing guards were also recommended to manage the traffic during drop-off pickup times. Each school had at least 9 recommendations. Cocoa High and McNair had the most, 16 recommendations. Across the board, sidewalks, sign signal projects were recommended the most to fill in the sidewalk gaps in our 2019 Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan, and to incorporate safety through signal timing and signage wherever possible. Detailed existing conditions, school coordination meeting, field review notes, and recommendations were all compiled in the assessment and implementation reports, and these all could be found on our website. Graphical summary reports were also compiled to provide all figures and maps for each of these schools. This can be used for the cities, the county, the school district to use when applying for grants. Sorry. The next steps for the Space Coast TPO will coordinate with the City of Rockledge and COCO, Brevard County, FDOT, and the Brevard Public School System to go over the recommendations and see how we can implement them. School campus recommendations can be implemented through school funding, whereas maintenance, infrastructure, and feasibility study projects can access other sources of funding, such as local and state operating budgets, community improvement programs, other state funding such as Safe Routes to School, grant or nonprofit funding programs, and federal funding through the Space Coast TPO. And many of the stakeholders can work together to accomplish some low-hanging fruit of the recommendations that we provided that they can do in-house. And that's all, if you have any questions. Yes, Ginger.
Ginger.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
County.
They have to submit for us to do that, but right now we don't have the funding to do that, but hopefully in 2 years we will.
That's not good.
Yeah.
I have a child that climbs over the fence of the yard behind me into my yard to go a different route to school because the road that he must walk down he doesn't feel safe on. So you see a 8-year-old kid climbing a 6-foot plastic fence. It's pretty entertaining.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up, reports. First report is from the FDOT. Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the TAC-CAC Board. I'm Chuck Coppenall with the Florida Department of Transportation, and I'll be presenting the FDOT report. Each year, the district and metropolitan planning organizations must jointly certify the metropolitan transportation planning process. This joint certification begins in January, and the report is due to the central office no later than June 1st. The evaluation packet consists of 2 forms. Form 1 is completed by the MPO-TPO executive director and staff, and Form 2 is completed by FDOT. With this year's certification, I'm pleased to announce that Space Coast TPO has scored 100% in their certification and are classified low risk, meaning Space Coast TPO complied with all material significant items, resulting in no findings or recommendations from the FDOT. I would like to add a personal note that Georgiana and her staff have done a wonderful job keeping this organization in line and compliant with all federal and state requirements. Now I'll share 2 project updates. The milling and resurfacing project on State Road A1A, north of 404 to south of Sherry Lee Lane, running adjacent to Patrick's Space Force Base, began in March with an estimated completion of late 2024. They have started to the south from the south limit and are working their way north. The milling and resurfacing project on State Road 5, US 1 from Indian River County line to north of Gold Creek has received its final acceptance on April 7th of this year. So that project is now complete. In conclusion, I would like to announce that there will be a public meeting on May 23rd presenting a signalization project for the intersection of State Road 519 and Levitt Parkway, and also including a pedestrian safety project along 519 from Rosa Jones Drive to State Road 520. The meeting time is 5:30 to 7 o'clock and can be attended physically at the McClarty Park Community Center in Rockledge, Florida, or virtually. If you're very interested, please see me after this meeting for more information on this project, along with information on road closures. That concludes my report, Mr. Chair, and I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Chuck. Any questions for Chuck?
I have one, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Georgiana.
Not a question, just a comment that the FDOT is hosting the Central Florida Safety Summit on May 17th. I think all of the committee members should have gotten an invite. This is going to be for the development of their new safety strategic plan. And they have a draft action plan as well. So it's going to be from 10 to 2, May 17th. The cost is $30, and that will just cover launch at SeaWorld Orlando. And Secretary Tyler, John Tyler, will be the moderator on a panel, and there will be a elected official or representative from each one of the MPOs at this event, and our very own council member Don Willis from Cape Canaveral is going to be representing the Space Coast TPO. So we're really excited to be a part of that, and we appreciate the leadership from the department to continue their march towards safety for our region. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I was going to mention that event, Georgiana,
I'm
but the
sorry.
thing, no. The reason I didn't is because I went to Eventbrite and they're sold out of tickets.
Oh,
so I didn't
really?
bring it up.
Oh,
They do have volunteer tickets. I don't know what that means, but that might mean you have to volunteer. So that's the only reason I didn't mention that, but thank you for bringing that up,
very good.
Georgiana.
I'm excited to hear that, very much so.
So anyway.
Thank you, Chuck.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Next will be the BPAC with Sarah.
All right, Sarah Crom, Senior Transportation Planner. The BPAC met on April 29th, so you do not have draft minutes from that meeting in this agenda package because of the timing of the agenda package with that meeting. They reviewed the work order for Dixon Boulevard, their draft BPAC strategic plan, which is no longer draft, which is included in your agenda package. They received a presentation on the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan Annual Report. This is several months late, so please note this is for November 1st, 2022 through October 31st, 2023. as well as also the school routes analysis. And then we did some work with needs list development for our 2050 long-range transportation plan. Included within your agenda package is also 2 trail updates for the 2 trail projects that we're doing in-house, the North Merritt Island Pioneer Trail Feasibility Study and the Southern Brevard Trails Master Plan. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Sarah, any questions for Sarah?
All right, thank you.
Great. Good job, Sarah. Space Coast Area Transit. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Space Coast Area Transit has the following highlights of the last Transportation Disadvantaged Local Coordinating Board meeting. They were approval of grievance procedures, the appointments of 2 new members to the grievance committee, approval of the annual bylaws, approval of the fiscal year 2023 Community Transportation Coordinator evaluation, and a review of the Transportation Development Plan stakeholders interviews. The next meeting will be on May 13th at the Vieira Government Center at 10:30 till 12 noon. Transit report. Safety performance measures for the public transportation transit are established via the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. TPOs are required to either adopt the targets established by the transit agency or their own. Space Coast Area Transit adopted their previously established PTA-SP performance measures with their annual update. A full report on that can be seen on page 141 if you go to the website that's referenced there. On April 25th, we submitted a grant to FTA under the Low No Zero Emissions Grant Program for 7 electric paratransit vehicles and 5 fixed route electric vehicles along with the needed infrastructure. This would replace 7 gas and 5 diesel vehicles in the current fleet, which have exceeded their useful life. The total estimated project cost is $13,603,285. The required local funding match of $2,015,377 will be funded through the Transportation Development Credits on behalf of the Florida Department of Transportation. Our fixed route ridership slipped slightly in March. We were down 2.79% from last year. We provided 152,182 trips in March compared to 156,550 the previous year. On the paratransit side, we were down 2.59% compared to the same period last year. This month we provided 7,051 trips, and last year it was 7,234 trips. We are continuing to work with the TPO on the Transit Development Plan as well as the Mobility on Demand study. And that would conclude my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, public engagement report. Good morning, Abby.
Good morning. I'm going to have to lower this a bit. Just for the sake of time, I am just going to skip a few slides. All of our event recaps and some public engagement wins, we've posted those on social media if you want to go further into the recaps, but I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. So I'm going to start here. So May is Bike Month. We're joining the League of American Bicyclists to celebrate bicycling this month and on all months as well. But we're going to be talking about the benefits of biking, physical, mental well-being, and we're encouraging our community partners to share those posts as well. So speaking of which, this week actually is Bike and Roll to School Day on Wednesday. Of course, May is kind of difficult for some of our schools because of testing in the end of the year, so many of them are celebrating on different days in the month, but we're encouraging families to, bike, roll, scooter, however you want to get there to school and making it a family event. We have many schools participating, and we look forward to sharing those photos and supporting events also in the community. Here's just a quick snapshot of some recent and upcoming outreach events. This time of year, typically school starts to wind down, but we actually get very busy preparing our summer programs, specifically Shelby, our education outreach coordinator, because she will be using the summer as an opportunity to educate our youth during summer camp programs and other initiatives about bicycle and pedestrian safety. Here's a quick look at some of the topics we plan to cover for the month of May for social media. So some big ones that stand out: Motorcycle Safety Awareness Month is May. That is an uptick for Brevard County that we're seeing across in fatalities and serious injuries. So we are trying to get ahead of the curve on that by promoting safety. National Emergency Services Month, we're going to connect that to Vision Zero because we know our emergency services are a big part of the recovery efforts here for Safe Systems approach. So we're going to be touching on that. And then National Seatbelt Enforcement. But the real reason I wanted to get up here today was to plug, we have some great public events coming up here soon, but to introduce this, we are developing our long-range transportation plan. It's that time of season again. This happens about every 5 years. And this plan helps guide how we move people and goods over the next 25 years, and we can't do it without public input. So to kind of kick us off, I wanted to show you a quick video.
The Space Coast is growing. We're reaching for the stars. But how do we get around on the ground? The Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization is planning now to meet our transportation needs of tomorrow. From roads and rails and ports to trails, we're looking at how we can invest in regional mobility, safety, and resiliency to keep us moving while also keeping us connected. Whether you're running errands, going to work, or planning your weekend, what kind of transportation options would help you get to your destinations? Autonomous shuttles? Improved bike lanes? Passenger rail? You have the power to shape the future of transportation. Visit sctpo.com or follow us on social media to get involved. Let's advance transportation together.
We want to hear from our community about our transportation needs for the future, and we are taking this on the road, literally. We are going to be hosting 4 different interactive mini workshops all throughout the county. We'll have a north area, south area, central, and a beachside event happening. And during these mini workshops, we're asking our community to come out and share their ideas about the future of transportation. They'll also learn more about our transportation improvement program, which outlines our projects, as you know, for the next 5 years. And other things that they can do there, they can help shape our station. We're going to have a survey where they can help us design a passenger rail station for Brevard County that meets the needs of our community. They can be a transportation tycoon. They can participate in an engaging activity where they get to simulate where budget goes for projects. They'll hear from transportation experts about the latest trends and needs. And then they'll also be able to share their thoughts and experiences on how we can improve mobility through Brevard County by reviewing corridor maps and making some comments. So they're free to attend, but registration is required. I'm going to be pushing this to all of our local public information officers, our city partners. We'll be sending it out to you. You are our best advocates here as our advisory committee members. So I just highly encourage you to promote this. There is a flyer at your seat today. When you scan that QR code, it goes to our events page on our website. And again, I just ask that you share, like, attend. All of these are on Facebook already as well. So please, please, please come on out and support the TPO. And as always, please make sure you follow us on social media for any updates.
Thank you, Abby. Any questions for Abby?
Thank you.
Thank you. Great video, by the way. Our last item is the local government report. Is there any local governments that would like to report on things happening? Go, Bob.
I just wanted to call out Cliff for the recent Brevard Corporate 5K and hosting it. It's not too often you actually get to run on a runway. Over 1,300 participants, 50 different corporations and teams. Mr. Cliff came in, I believe, 61st with a very respectable time of just over 24 minutes. And the airport team came in 11th out of 50. And the port team came in 18th. They take the top 4 fastest finishers. I was not one of the top 4 fastest finishers, but we still had a great time. So appreciate you hosting that again.
He was running to make his connection.
Yeah. No, appreciate it. We had a good time. It's a unique an event and ability for people to come out to the airport and see the airport maybe, as they haven't in the past. So appreciate you saying that, Bob. That's great. Anyone else? Okay. Any other business to come before this committee? If not, we will adjourn. Thank you.